Hey guys, tonight we trudge onto the blinding white expanse of the Tagaza salt flats at dawn, where the ground gleams like a frozen sea of glass, and the first glint of morning sun strikes your brow like a hot blade. Your boots crunch brittle salt with each step, sending up clouds of dust that cling to your ankles. You inhale the metallic tang of mineral-rich air and feel the sun's heat press down even before the day truly begins. You probably won't survive this grind without blistered feet, a parched throat, or a camel's stubborn collapse. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments so we can chart our sunrises together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge toward the salt pans, where vast kilns of brine-hardened crust lie in neat squares, each slab towering shin-high against the horizon. In mainstream accounts of medieval West African trade, from 11th century Ghanaian court records to 14th century Tuareg chronicles, Tagaza's salt ranked so precious it formed the backbone of trans-Saharan caravans, commanding prices equal by weight to gold. Every slab you see was cut from subterranean brine springs left to crystallize under the unforgiving sun for weeks, then scraped and hewn by pick and chisel. Yesterday's workers have hoes thrown aside, their silhouettes drifting across the flats like ghostly harvesters. You trudge past rusted iron picks and broken pottery shards, lantern holders that once marked salt kiln locations at night. Mainstream archaeology confirms these lamps guided nocturnal labor and warned travelers of treacherous sinkholes. Yet fringe lore speaks of phantom glow pits, where brine springs rich in phosphates shimmered faintly after dusk, an eerie effect said to lure unwary diggers into quicksand. Scholars still debate whether any medieval observer described genuine luminescence, or whether these tales served as cautionary metaphors for greed's pitfalls. You trudge to a squat stone platform where Tuareg salt masters, clad in indigo-dyed veils that repel UV glare, direct teams of workers stacking heavy slabs on camel panniers. Each camel bears 6 to 8 salt cakes, totaling up to 120 pounds of salt per hump. Mainstream caravan treatises note that well-conditioned dromedaries could carry these loads for days. Yet recent animal physiology studies suggest realistic loads averaged closer to 80 pounds to avoid hoof damage. Historians still argue whether medieval edicts capped load weights or if practical necessity overrode official limits when salt profits spiked. As you trudge behind a bench of elders, they recite blessing chants in Tamashek, invoking local desert spirits, Mater al-Maghreb and Tanarar, to protect the caravan. Mainstream Islamic travel guides of the 12th century acknowledge syncretic practices blending Quranic prayers and pre-Islamic spirit invocations for safe passage. Yet fringe anthropologists highlight a marginal poem instructing that each load's corner be anointed with date palm oil at sunrise, a ritual said to seal the salt's purity. Scholars still debate whether date oil rites held genuine preservative benefits or served purely symbolic roles in blessing each haul. The sun climbs as you trudge out onto softer pans, each step sinking ankle deep into a gritty white slurry. You stop to wipe sweat from your eyes, tasting grit on your tongue, and wondering how far you'll walk before midday rest. In mainstream caravan calendars, merchants scheduled 2 brief stops mid-morning and mid-afternoon under scant acacia shade. Yet fringe caravan diaries whisper of a third secret rest hour taken under the full moon's glare, when the salt flats glowed silver and offered cooler footing. Historians still argue whether nocturnal halts were widespread survival strategy or poetic flair in travelogues. Ahead, sharp-edged ridges of crystallized salt rise like miniature mountain ranges. You trudge to a ledge and pause, feeling vertigo on this flat nothingness. One wrong step and you risk slippage or an ankle sprain, jeopardizing the entire caravan's progress. Mainstream survival manuals credit the invention of woven palm fiber sandals, specialized salt slippers, to Tagaza's miners, reducing abrasion and improving traction. Yet a fringe seamstress's leaflet extols sandals dipped in camel fat grease before dawn, and improvised lubrication that some claim lulled the salt into loosening its grip, smoothing each stumble. Scholars still debate whether greasy sandals aided traction or simply slipped more, leading to novel wipeout tales. You trudge onward to the caravan's front line, where camels fold their forelegs and kneel to be loaded. Each salt master checks straps and leather thongs for tiers the tiniest fray could snap under weight, leading to catastrophic load loss far from help. Mainstream leatherwork treatises document tanning techniques using goat's milk and iron-rich river clay to toughen fibers against salt's corrosive bite. Yet fringe tanner ballads claim adding extracts of desert thyme to the tanning bath imbued thongs with insect-repelling properties. Scholars still argue whether thyme-tanned leather offered tangible benefits or emerged from poetic tanning lore. By late morning, you trudge back to the gathering point for midday breaks. Workers huddle around a low pit fire where goat skewers sizzle and barley gruel simmers in a rusted cauldron. The bland nutrition sustains, yet you savor each coarse grain and tender meat morsel. In mainstream dietary records of caravan crossings, roughly 500 calories per person per day kept the march steady. Yet fringe herbalist scrolls recommended adding dried mint leaves to the gruel believed to stave off nausea and desert hallucinations. Historians still debate whether mint additions reached medieval salt traders or represent modern health hacks projected backward. As the sun reaches zenith, you trudge to a shaded wellhead, one of only 2 within 100 miles, where water tastes of iron and dust. A bow-legged youth draws buckets, while an elder scoops water into goatskin pouches. Mainstream hydrological studies of Saharan trade routes highlight these few brackish wells as critical nodes often fiercely contested. Yet marginal war ballads recount one failed caravan ambush at the well, where salt masters poured flour into enemy waters to lull attackers to sleep on the salt rim. Scholars still question whether this act of sabotage occurred or remains wily mythology spun around survival tactics. Refreshed but weary, you trudge back to your camel, whose rhythmic chew of thorny scrub is the only sound beyond the wind's wail. Ahead, the vast Sahara dunes rise copper waves, stretching beyond memory. Your steps slow. The salt flats recede into ridge and mirage. But for now, you carry the night's blessings, midday meals, and heavy salt loads into the endless white. Because in medieval times, hauling salt slabs across to Gaza was not just a sunrise ritual, it was a crucible of sun salt spirit and sweat guiding caravans toward distant kingdoms that craved white gold. You trudge from the heaving salt flats toward a shaded cluster of date palms, where the caravan assembles horns and camels huddled beneath fronded canopies. The air here tastes faintly of palm sap and spice residual from morning departures, while gravelly dust mingles with the distant bray of camels and clipped Tuareg commands. This is the heart of caravan assembly rituals, where every lament prayer and measured tribute blends into a precise choreography under desert skies. By mainstream accounts, each salt caravan began with a blessing derived from Islamic prayer books and whispered alongside Tuareg invocations to the desert spirit Arawan to ensure safe passage. As you trudge past the first line of camels, you hear imams reciting Quranic verses in low rhythmic cadence, their voices melding with the breeze. Each camel's lead thong is passed through the reciter's fingers for blessing, then tied off with a saffron-dyed kerchief. These kerchiefs, crisp and bright, marked each beast as part of the Tagaza salt caravans, a symbol recognized by local tribes and desert monarchs alike. Yet beyond the official prayer lay fringe customs. Some guides insisted on placing small, shell-lined gourds of date wine at each animal's feet, a tipple for thirsty camels to offer strength in anticipation of the dunes. Modern veterinary historians still debate whether date wine provided any nutritional boost or served simply as a symbolic libation to foster camaraderie between man and beast. You trudge forward to the lashing platform where expert handlers, Tuareg salt masters, known as amirs, inspect each pannier and adjust leather thongs under the sun's glare. Camels crouched in obedient submission bear salt cakes strapped 3 to a side. The emirs tap each load with slender palm sticks, listening for dull echoes that signal stable packing. In mainstream caravan records, this tap test ensured slabs were snug. Loose cakes risked shifting and toppling when dunes pitched the caravan at steep angles. Yet a marginal skaldic verse praises a hidden palm tap tune, a subtle variation in tap rhythm decoded by veteran guides to assess both load security and camel temperament. If taps echoed with a hollow ring followed by a camel's low sigh, the beast was deemed ready. A flinch at the third tap meant impatience or injury. Scholars still debate whether such acoustic profiling formed genuine practice or emerged from poetic exaggeration of handlers' keen observational skills. As you trudge past, you notice woven mats of palm leaf tucked beneath each saddle to protect camels' flanks from coarse salt chafing. Mainstream zoological studies confirm that these mats reduced skin lesions and prevented girth sores during long marches. Yet fringe leatherworkers' manuals advise smearing mats with extracts of desert lavender, believed to calm irritated flesh and imbue beasts with calmer dispositions. Historians still argue whether scented mat linings spread beyond isolated handlers or remained a rare pampering ritual for prized camels. A low murmur rises as the caravan's smith forges final iron anklets. Simple iron bands affixed to camels' legs to prevent slippage on salt-crusted rock. Mainstream metallurgy records indicate that iron anklets protected hooves and reduced labored gait in sandy stretches. Yet fringe accounts claim these anklets also warded off snake-arid spirits whose cursing hiss could be silenced by ringing metal. Scholars still debate whether anklet lore reflected genuine pagan holdovers or later embellishment. You trudge to the caravan's front, where the wali or caravan leader oversees final arrangements. He inspects the caravan's tally stick, a carved rod marking departure date, intended destination, and total number of beasts loaded. Mainstream legal treatises required a slave scribe to notch the rod under oath, guaranteeing the caravan's composition for tax and liability. Yet a hidden footnote in a 12th century travel log suggests certain walis secretly carved extra notches at a diagonal shadow markings, indicating special cargo reserved for favored merchants. Historians still argue whether these clandestine marks formed recorded practice or whispered conspiracy. Next, you trudge toward a circle of elders, arrayed on low stools, each holding a leather bag of dates, almonds, and salted goat cheese, the caravan's first provision deposits. According to mainstream caravan etiquette, each elder contributed a fixed share of provisions, symbolizing communal investment in everyone's survival. The wali tastes each morsel, nodding approval, before distributing portions to camel handlers, scribes, and guards. Yet fringe etiquette scrolls prescribe adding a pinch of powdered frankincense to the date mixture, a fragrant offering to desert spirits believed to mask human fatigue during midday doldrums. Scholars still debate whether frankincense ever truly joined caravan rations or belonged to rumor-fueled extravagance. You trudge by the mounted guard unit horsemen in leather cuirasses and spears strapped to saddles. They raise lances in salute as the wali signals departure. Mainstream military chronicles note that desert charges followed the salt caravan to ward off bandits. Fringe war ballads claim that guard captains lit small fires along the route's edge at night, sending smoke signals to deter thieves and misdirect would-be attackers. Historians still debate whether these fires formed standard defensive measure or remained poetic war stories. Finally, under the sun's rising glare, the caravan's vanguard, armed with palm-wood staffs and kite-shaped shields, steps forward. You trudge into place among the camels, your heavy footsteps stirring billows of salt dust that drift skyward like ghostly banners. The wali mounts his dromedary, raises his staff in solemn salute, and with a soft drumbeat from a distant reed instrument, declares the caravan on its way. Because in medieval Saharan trade, caravan assembly rituals were not mere formality. They wove together faith and folklore, animal stewardship, and human solidarity, crafting a fragile alliance that carried white gold across the world's largest desert crucible. You trudge from the clustered palms and loaded camels onto the shifting sands of the Erg Chigaga, where dune after dune ripples like a vast living ocean of copper-colored waves. Your boots sink ankle-deep with every step, sand slipping away faster than you can press forward. The sky above bleaches to brittle blue, and the sun glares without mercy. You realize quickly that walking these dunes is a test of will as much as of endurance. For here in the Erg, the landscape itself moves beneath your feet, because now it is time for crossing the Erg Chigaga. In mainstream caravan itineraries, the Erg Chigaga, one of the Sahara's largest dune seas, looms as the single greatest obstacle, its dunes rising up to 150 meters and shifting with every wind. You trudge toward the first crest energy, pooling in your legs like molten lead. Experienced guides watch the dune slopes for wind lines, ridges, formed by the previous night's breeze that hint at firmer sand beneath. Stepping on a wind line yields a solid purchase. Stray off its course and you sink into soft sand that sucks at your boots. Yet fringe desert lore warns of wandering dunes, those that shift so rapidly they can bury laden camels overnight. A 13th century Andalusian traveler wrote of dunes that stole entire camps, leaving only tents' tops peeking before the dawn's light rescued survivors. Modern satellite imagery confirms some dunes migrate tens of meters per year, but historians still debate whether medieval caravans ever faced complete dune burial or if such tales served to underscore the desert's unpredictability. You trudge up a steep dune flank, leaning into the slope, toes dug in for traction. Camel drivers teach a zigzag ascent, known as dune ducking, to maintain lower angles, reducing effort and avoiding sudden slides. You pause at the crest, heart pounding, toes numb, then trudge down the far side in a controlled slide. To save energy, sand billowing around your ankles like living smoke. Midway through the dune sea, you trudge past a lone acacia bush perched improbably on a little hollow. Its roots tap deep water, a rare oasis in endless sand. Caravan lore calls these ghost trees, for they vanish under shifting sands only to reappear years later. Guides treat each bush as a milestone proof that you've covered the midpoint. Yet fringe botany scribes speculate that ghost trees were survivors of a far wetter era, now clinging to life on ancient groundwater. Scholars still argue whether these solitary trees represent relic populations or simply resilient scrub species adapting to mobile dunes. As the sun climbs, you trudge again, sweat stinging your eyes and salt crusting your brows. The camels trudge alongside panniers clinking from minor slides. Guides hand out small gourds of water rationed in sips to prevent cramps. Mainstream caravan logs record daily water rations of under 2 quarts per man, reckoned just enough to stave off dehydration while preserving precious supplies. Yet fringe medical accounts recommend a single midday stop in dune shadow, consuming water straight from animal skins to maximize moisture retention. Historians still debate whether midday mirages led to actual shaded halts or fueled stories of life-saving illusions. Ahead, the dunes crest and flatten into a small salt pan, a white island in a sea of copper. You trudge onto its surface, feet cracking salt crust that crunches beneath boots. Here guides check bearings, using the sun's position and a small quadrant carved from wood, an ancient tool for determining the sun's angle above the horizon. Mainstream navigational treatises confirm use of quadrants and cross staffs among desert traders, though their accuracy depended on clear skies and solid horizons. Yet fringe guides argue that salt pans' reflective glare hindered readings, leading to navigational errors that stranded small caravans for days. Scholars still debate whether salt pan calibration corrections existed or remained lost desert lore. You trudge off the pan and face another line of dunes taller and steeper than those before. Some reach heights that swallow the horizon, and your shadow at midday lies dwarfed at your feet. Camel drivers issue soft commands in Tamashek, encouraging animals to push through midday's furnace. Frost-like sweat crystallizes on your pack, each droplet a testament to heat's relentless dehydration. Mainstream physiological studies on heat illness note that travelers risk heat exhaustion and heat stroke when exerting in sand above 45 degrees temperatures reached here by late morning. Yet fringe Sufi poems claim that reciting special verses from the Quran while climbing cooled the heart, delaying heat's onset. Historians still debate whether such spiritual cooling rituals played any role in actual physiological endurance or served purely motivational purposes. At last, you trudge over the final dune lip and spot the shadowed outline of rocky outcrops marking the desert's edge. Below a narrow valley of gravel and desert grasses hints at an ephemeral wadi channel that may flow briefly after rare rains. Guides rejoice. This valley offers softer footing and occasional desert succulents for camels to nibble. Mainstream ecological surveys identify these wadis as critical corridor habitats where wildlife and water carve relief in the sea of sand. Yet fringe local song describes the wadi as the desert's heartbeat, pulsing with hidden springs that test savvy travelers' resolve. Scholars still argue whether hidden desert springs once lay within these wadis or belong to hopeful legends of land and water's unbreakable bond. Your body aches, vestiges of salt and sand grinding at your skin like tiny teeth. Yet you trudge down into the valley boots, now sturdy on gravel shoulders, easing as you leave dunes behind. Camels stir from their patient stoops, ready to resume the march. The erg's crucible has tested every sinew and will. Beyond lies flat feet that promise firmer paths toward Timbuktu and beyond. Because in medieval Saharan trade, crossing the Erg Chagaga was not merely journeying across sand. It was an odyssey of shifting terrain, waterless trials, and quiet triumphs that forged caravan resilience from dune to desert edge. You trudge from the clustered palms and loaded camels onto the shifting sands of the Erg Chagaga, where dune after dune ripples like a vast living ocean of copper-colored waves. Your boots sink ankle deep with every step, sand slipping away faster than you can press forward. The sky above bleaches to brittle blue, and the sun glares without mercy. You realize quickly that walking these dunes is a test of will as much as of endurance. For here in the Erg, the landscape itself moves beneath your feet, because now it is time for crossing the Erg Chagaga. In mainstream caravan itineraries, the Erg Chagaga, one of the Sahara's largest dune seas, looms as the single greatest obstacle, its dunes rising up to 150 meters and shifting with every wind. You trudge toward the first crest energy, pooling in your legs like molten lead. Experienced guides watch the dune slopes for wind lines, ridges, formed by the previous night's breeze that hint at firmer sand beneath. Stepping on a wind line yields a solid purchase. Stray off its course and you sink into soft sand that sucks at your boots. Yet fringe desert lore warns of wandering dunes, those that shift so rapidly they can bury laden camels overnight. A 13th century Andalusian traveler wrote of dunes that stole entire camps, leaving only tents' tops peeking before the dawn's light rescued survivors. Modern satellite imagery confirms some dunes migrate tens of meters per year, but historians still debate whether medieval caravans ever faced complete dune burial, or if such tales served to underscore the desert's unpredictability. You trudge up a steep dune flank leaning into the slope, toes dug in for traction. Camel drivers teach a zigzag ascent, known as dune ducking, to maintain lower angles, reducing effort and avoiding sudden slides. You pause at the crest heart, pounding toes numb, then trudge down the far side in a controlled slide to save energy, sand billowing around your ankles like living smoke. Midway through the dune sea, you trudge past a lone acacia bush perched improbably on a little hollow. Its roots tap deep water, a rare oasis in endless sand. Caravan lore calls these ghost trees, for they vanish under shifting sands, only to reappear years later. Guides treat each bush as a milestone proof that you've covered the midpoint. Yet fringe botany scribes speculate that ghost trees were survivors of a far wetter era, now clinging to life on ancient groundwater. Scholars still argue whether these solitary trees represent relic populations or simply resilient scrub species adapting to mobile dunes. As the sun climbs, you trudge again, sweat stinging your eyes and salt crusting your brows. The camels trudge alongside panniers clinking from minor slides. Guides hand out small gourds of water rationed in sips to prevent cramps. Mainstream caravan logs record daily water rations of under 2 quarts per man, reckoned just enough to stave off dehydration while preserving precious supplies. Yet fringe medical accounts recommend a single midday stop in dune shadow, consuming water straight from animal skins to maximize moisture retention. Historians still debate whether midday mirages led to actual shaded halts or fueled stories of life-saving illusions. Ahead, the dunes crest and flatten into a small salt pan, a white island in a sea of copper. You trudge onto its surface, feet cracking salt crust that crunches beneath boots. Here guides check bearings, using the sun's position and a small quadrant carved from wood, an ancient tool for determining the sun's angle above the horizon. Mainstream navigational treatises confirm use of quadrants and cross staffs among desert traders, though their accuracy depended on clear skies and solid horizons. Yet fringe guides argue that salt pans' reflective glare hindered readings, leading to navigational errors that stranded small caravans for days. Scholars still debate whether salt pan calibration corrections existed or remained lost desert lore. You trudge off the pan and face another line of dunes, taller and steeper than those before. Some reach heights that swallow the horizon, and your shadow at midday lies dwarfed at your feet. Camel drivers issue soft commands in Tamashek, encouraging animals to push through midday's furnace. Frost-like sweat crystallizes on your pack, each droplet a testament to heat's relentless dehydration. Mainstream physiological studies on heat illness note that travelers risk heat exhaustion and heat stroke when exerting in sand above 45 degrees C temperatures reached here by late morning. Yet fringe Sufi poems claim that reciting special verses from the Quran while climbing cooled the heart, delaying heat's onset. Historians still debate whether such spiritual cooling rituals played any role in actual physiological endurance, or served purely motivational purposes. At last, you trudge over the final dune lip and spot the shadowed outline of rocky outcrops marking the desert's edge. Below, a narrow valley of gravel and desert grasses hints at an ephemeral wadi channel that may flow briefly after rare rains. Guides rejoice. This valley offers softer footing and occasional desert succulents for camels to nibble. Mainstream ecological surveys identify these wadis as critical corridor habitats where wildlife and water carve relief in the sea of sand. Yet fringe local song describes the wadi as the desert's heartbeat, pulsing with hidden springs that test savvy travelers' resolve. Scholars still argue whether hidden desert springs once lay within these wadis or belong to hopeful legends of land and water's unbreakable bond. Your body aches, vestiges of salt and sand grinding at your skin like tiny teeth. Yet you trudge down into the valley boots, now sturdy on gravel shoulders, easing as you leave dunes behind. Camels stir from their patient stoops, ready to resume the march. The erg's crucible has tested every sinew and will. Beyond lies flat feet that promise firmer paths toward Timbuktu and beyond. Because in medieval Saharan trade, crossing the Erg Chagaga was not merely journeying across sand. It was an odyssey of shifting terrain, waterless trials, and quiet triumphs that forged caravan resilience from dune to desert edge. You trudge beyond the granite outcrop and into a shifting haze of heat and dust, where the landscape ripples like a disturbed mirage. Sand dunes and rocky ridges blur in the wavering air. Even the camels stumble as the horizon wavers, and every breath tastes of dry wind and swirling grit. Here in the heart of the Sahara's glare, nature plays cruel tricks, mirage and dehydration. Mainstream medieval Saharan chronicles, from the 12th century to Gaza logs to Ibn Battuta's later travelogues, warn that mirages known as Fata Morgana often lured caravans off course, shimmering false oases and pools of water that vanished on closer approach. You trudge across a parched plain where a distant shimmer as ripples in concentric waves, looking for palm trees and cooling shade. Yet as you press forward, the image dissolves into nothing but hot sand reflecting the sun's relentless heat. Scholars still debate whether medieval caravans recorded these mirages scientifically or dismissed them as the desert's capricious magic. Your throat tightens with each step. Camel handlers salute you with clay gourds of water, tiny precious vessels holding barely a mouthful. You trudge to unscrew one, the leather seal crackling, and sip a warm trickle that slides down parched lungs. Mainstream caravan manuals prescribe taking no more than 3 sips at a time to stretch finite supplies across long stretches between wells. Yet fringe desert health scrolls advise sipping as if tasting the sea, slower, reverent sips that honor water's fleeting presence. Historians still argue whether such ritual sips measurably conserved hydration or simply soothed the spirit amid suffering. As you trudge on, every breath pulls in stinging sand grains that collect like fine dust in your nasal passages. Workers wrap scarves tightly around noses and mouths, a practice recorded in medieval Berber law codes to prevent sand inhalation and choking. Yet fringe medical testimonies note that wearing too tight a wrap risked suffocation in sudden wind pits when air pressure dropped, leading to blackouts. Scholars still debate whether any recorded deaths linked directly to sand masks, or if such warnings served as cautionary tales to loosen wraps when the air turned still. The sun climbs toward its zenith, and you trudge into a windswept amphitheater of rippled dunes, the sand's surface hot enough to blister unprotected skin. You pause under a lone boulder, a rare shadow, and press a hand to your forehead, Mainstream studies of heat exhaustion describe symptoms you recognize: dizziness, muscle cramps, and rapid heartbeat. Caravans always scheduled midday rest here, huddling beneath any rock shade until temperatures dropped. Yet fringe itineraries suggest chanting cold wind verses to conjure mental coolness, a practice some credit with forestalling collapse until the sun's glare softened. Historians still debate whether mental recitations offered true relief or simply distracted from physical misery. A sudden shimmer dances at the dune's crest, a pool of liquid blue sky reflecting in the sand. You trudge toward it, hope rising only to find a slick film of salt-crusted water that stings your eyes and mouth when tasted. Mainstream travelers' diaries caution that many mirage pools formed where underground brine seeped to the surface water that solved neither thirst nor thirst's promise. Yet tales persist of desperate souls consuming the brine in dire days, then succumbing to intense vomiting and even seizures, effects attributed to salt toxicity. Modern toxicology confirms high salinity water induces cellular dehydration and electrolyte imbalance. Yet medieval writers ascribed such collapses to desert curses or spirits' wrath. You trudge past scattered camel bones, bleached white by sun, and sand-jagged reminders that dehydration claimed both beast and man. Caravan lore spoke of following these bones back to the last watering hole, using scavenged buffalo rib to trace water veins beneath the dunes. Map scribes sometimes marked bone piles as cautionary waypoints. Scholars still debate whether bone mapping ever guided lost caravans or remains romantic speculation born of desperation. Despite the mirage's trickery, you press on with dogged resolve. You trudge past a low ridge where at its base a patch of hardy succulents, desert bottle gourds, spring from hidden moisture. Guides harvest their bitter pulp for moisture infusion, a risky remedy recorded in fringe desert survival pamphlets. Whether gourds reliably held drinkable water or served principally as vinegar-flavored supplements remains debated among historians. With salted boots and sun-baked skin, you trudge until the sun's angle shifts the horizon, folding in on itself as afternoon shadows lengthen. Fatigue battles vigilance. One misstep into a deep sand trap could twist an ankle and doom the caravan's progress. You sip your final reserved waters, calculating how far the next rest point lies. Mainstream caravan waypoints, marked by basalt outcrops, offer intermittent refuge, but only every 2 days. Yet fringe rowers speak of hidden desert cisterns dug by ancient craftsmen, buried under shifting dunes, and periodically rediscovered by eagle-eyed guides. Scholars still question whether any medieval caravans truly stumbled upon these caches, or if tales persisted to fuel hope amid parched despair. As the heat haze distorts the sky into shimmering rings, you trudge onward, senses narrowed to the slightest hint of wind or shade. Every drop of water becomes a sacred treasure, every distant ridge a potential oasis. The desert tests body and mind with illusions and exhaustion, yet those who press through mirage-charged sands earn stories of unimaginable resilience. Because in medieval Saharan trade, mirage and dehydration were not mere hazards. They were unseen adversaries, shaping journeys, forging caravan bonds in shared suffering and teaching that survival in the world's harshest crucible demanded equal parts physical grit and mental resolve. You trudge beyond the mirage-haunted sands as dusk approaches the sky's palette, shifting from blinding blue to molten gold. The first stars wink into view overhead, faint pinpricks against the vast desert dome. Here in this silence, broken only by camel footfalls and whispered guide calls, you discover the art of desert navigation. Stars, ancient techniques that transformed night's darkness into a guiding map. Mainstream medieval Arab astronomers such as al-Biruni detailed star charts used by desert caravans, Polaris. The North Star anchored northward bearings, while the belt of Orion signaled the southern horizon. You trudge to the dune's crest and pause, scanning the sky for Orion's 3 aligned stars. Beneath them, the faint cluster of the Pleiades arcs, gently marking due east when they rise. Camel guides memorized these stellar positions to maintain course across featureless dunes, ensuring Tagaza's salt reached the fabled trading cities beyond. Yet fringe Tuareg lore speaks of ghost constellations, spectral star patterns visible only during rare desert calms, said to trace ancient caravan routes and reveal hidden oases. A solitary 13th century Tuareg chant mentions the road of fallen palms mapped among these spirits. Modern historians still debate whether such phantom constellations were genuine sightings of atmospheric refraction and zodiacal light, or poetic invention to reinforce caravan cohesion under starry skies. You trudge under the waxing crescent moon, its silver arc offering slight light, and reach for the simple wooden astrolabe strapped at your belt, carved with rings to sight, Polaris and the Big Dipper. You angle its rotating pointer until the pointer's edge aligns with the North Star, then note the engraved latitude lines showing your approximate position. In mainstream navigation manuals, preserved in Andalusian libraries, such instruments aided both sea and desert voyagers. Yet a fringe desert notebook recounts that extreme temperature swings between day and night warped wooden astrolabes, leading some caravaneers to calibrate them only at dawn, an issue scholars still debate as genuine instrument flaw or exaggerated hazard. Turning southward, you trudge to observe the rising of Fomalhaut in the constellation Piscis Austrinus, known as the Lonely Star. Medieval star lore held that Fomalhaut's solitary brilliance marked due south and signaled the direction toward Timbuktu when it rose highest. Travelers timed departures to coincide with Fomalhaut's meridian transit at midnight, reducing reliance on fickle landmarks. Yet fringe caravan ballads claim that Fomalhaut once guided lost explorers to a secret well carved into a sandstone cliff, its location shared only in hushed whispers. Historians still debate whether any true well lay at that meridian line, or if the tale served as metaphor for hope in desolation. You trudge across the dune using celestial navigation to stay true. Camel bells echo softly as your guides mark each star's elevation with finger-spaced hand spans, a rough measure of altitude above the horizon. Mainstream anthropological studies note that such sighting methods, sloppily precise yet effective, offered accuracy within a few degrees enough to find distant mountain silhouettes. Fringe desert guides maintain that humming specific desert songs while sighting stars added a subtle vibrational alignment harmonizing mind and cosmos. Scholars still question whether these hums aided concentration or simply formed mnemonic cadences for novice navigators. A gentle breeze stirs, carrying grains of sand that reflect starlight like glitter. You trudge past a small cairn, marking a daytime caravan waypoint, its top lit by soul's last fading glow. Guides often used cairns aligned with stellar bearings, built so that from one vantage point, the cairn's tip pointed toward the rising of Arcturus in spring. Mainstream studies of Saharan archaeology confirm sites where cairn fields correlate with archaeoastronomical alignments. Yet fringe rock inscriptions nearby depict star people and desert beasts, suggesting cultural ties between navigation and mythology. Historians still debate whether these images formed practical guides or ceremonial art. Now, near midnight, you trudge under a vault of countless stars that shimmer with crystalline clarity. Orion stands high, Pleiades hover low, and the Milky Way arches overhead like a dusty river. Drinking in this panorama, you realize navigation was as much a spiritual communion as a technical skill. Each star whispered directions, each constellation carried centuries of caravan heritage, and each step on shifting sands felt tethered to celestial certainties. Because in medieval Saharan trade, desert navigation stars were not mere tools. They were guardians of routes across emptiness, stars of hope in the world's largest crucible, guiding salt and souls toward distant horizons under the eternal sky. You trudge on past the flickering stars and toward a low ridge where a pale glow marks the camp's fringe. Here in the deep desert night, you find no comfort in darkness, but new hazards. Sudden freezes that bite like frost worms and roaring sandstorms that scald every inch of exposed skin. Tonight, survival hinges on bracing for nighttime. Cold and sandstorms. As mainstream Saharan travelogues recount, desert temperatures plummet after sunset, often by 30 degrees within hours, as the sun's heat radiates back into space across the clear, dry air. You trudge toward the camp's communal fire, its feeble glow casting long, wobbling shadows across packed tents. Camel blankets, thick woolen wraps lined with goat hair fleece, hang ready to ward off the cold. You wrap one around your shoulders, the fibers crackling as frost forms on the outer strands. Camel drivers slip into layered tunics, linen shirts, beneath leather jerkins, breathing warm plumes of air into woolen scarves to stave off lung chill. Yet fringe desert lore warns of nightworm breath, a creeping cold thought to emanate from buried sand graves, seeping into blankets and draining body heat until travelers awoke on frozen mats. Few dared to sleep directly on ground. Instead, sprigs of damp palm fronds were laid under bedding to insulate against the sand's icy grip. Modern soil science confirms that desert sand loses heat rapidly after sundown, turning beds of loosened grains into cold plates beneath bodies. Scholars still argue whether palm frond insulation originated as practical folk remedy or as poetic antidote to fearful rumors. You trudge to the cluster of tents and slide into your own shelter, a triangular tent of goat hide stretched atop wooden poles. Inside, handlers stoke a small brazier of charcoal, its embers glowing red beneath a grate of steel mesh. Mainstream fire safety guides from 12th century Maghreb manuscripts recommend such mesh to prevent ash from igniting hides. Yet fringe caravan diaries caution that smoke trapped under tent flaps invited sandworm infestations, tiny scuttling creatures that burrow through hides, triggering a debate among historians whether sandworms were real pests or mythic metaphors for cold's slow invasion. No sooner does the fire crackle than a distant gust rises, rattling tent flaps like the growl of unseen beasts. You trudge outside and find the horizon aglow with shifting sand, an advancing wall of dunes swept by molten gusts. The guide shouts Hizan Tuareg for sandstorm, and everyone scrambles to lash down tents and secure loose gear. Mainstream caravan protocols insisted on lowering tents completely and burying edges beneath stones to prevent sheets from billowing. Yet fringe engineering texts describe craftsmen weaving tent ropes with strands of palm fiber, known as sand cords, treated in resin to resist abrasion. Whether these cords truly outlasted ordinary hemp or remained exotic experiments still divides scholars. You trudge across swirling grains as the storm descends. Goggles shield your eyes, and a makeshift face cloth wraps around your nose and mouth. Each breath tastes of iron grit. The guide's torch flickers us in the maelstrom, a lone beacon, as tents vanish in roiling dust. In mainstream nomadic lore sandstorms were named the desert's wrath, believed to be Erewhon's anger at those who mined too greedily. Yet some desert mystics claimed storms rose from the ghosts of caravans long buried, an allegory scholars still debate as moral fable or genuine legend. Swirling sand scours every uncovered surface. You trudge bent low hands, gripping hood edges, pressing forward toward a nearby low rock outcrop, the only shelter offering respite. As you hunker beneath its lip, you feel stones ping against your cloak like tiny missiles. Camel drivers follow flanks pressed against rock face, turning their hides windward to absorb the brunt. Modern wind tunnel studies show that such rock barriers can reduce wind speeds by 60% in their lee, confirming the value of natural windbreaks noted in medieval travel manuals. The storm persists for hours. Temperatures nosedive, and you trudge to hug your fire lantern beneath your cloak, seeking the faint radiance that rallies courage. You sip warm barley mash teeth, chattering against the chill, while handlers wrap each camel in leather mantles, leaving only nostrils exposed. Mainstream veterinary texts from the 14th century note that cold air inhalation risked camel pneumonia. Fringe herder lore prescribes sprinkling water on their muzzles, counterintuitive, but believed to seal the breaths in warm clouds. Scholars still debate whether spit sprays offered any health benefit or simply amused handlers in long nights. By pre-dawn, the storm abates in a sudden lull, a sharp silence broken only by the soft hiss of settling sand. You trudge out into a muted landscape, dunes laminated in fresh drifts and glittering in pale moonlight. Frost glazes every surface, transforming sand into a fragile crust that cracks underfoot. As you trudge onward, you notice footprints, those of camels and humans alike, etched in frost, soon to be erased by the next gust. Mainstream diary fragments advise leaving such tracks beside dunes as future guides to recall campsite positions. Yet fringe accounts caution that relying on frost tracks risked disorientation when thaw and wind wiped the record clean. Historians still argue whether frost track markers featured in actual itineraries or lingered as enveloping metaphor. You trudge back to the caravan, gathering point nostrils, stinging, stepping over drifted sand piled against canvas walls. Camel bells ring softly in the hush, an iron chorus that anchors each traveler in place. The storm's memory lingers in every frost crackle and every dust-laden breath, because in medieval Saharan trade, nighttime cold and sandstorms were not mere afterthoughts. They were elemental trials, shaping caravan lore, weaving cautionary tales of frost and grit into the marrow of every desert crossing. You trudge away from frost-glazed dunes and into a narrow wadi bed where the caravan's water carriers kneel beside a shallow well, one of only 3 reliable oases on this 1,000-mile salt route. The sun, now high, beats down without mercy, and every throat cracks for relief. Here you learn the precarious science of water rations and wells, the lifeblood of any Sahara crossing. In mainstream caravan handbooks, each traveler received exactly 3 liters of water per day, measured into goatskin pouches sealed with waxed cloth. You trudge over to the well's lip and peer down a narrow shaft rimmed by rough-hewn stone. Below, a swarm of copper-tinged water flees dances on the surface. The well is fed by an underground aquifer flowing through fractured sandstone, its depth varying by season and tribal stewardship. Guides deem this well Al-Ain al-Farida, the unique spring, and protect it jealously. Only one camel load is drawn at a time to prevent sudden drops that might collapse the shaft and condemn thirsty travelers. Yet fringe desert lore tells of poisoned springs wells that tasted sweet but were laced with dissolved gypsum and heavy metals. A single sip could induce delirium or kidney failure days later. You trudge to dip a gourd-shaped calabash into the well. The water smells faintly of iron and earth. The guide drops a pinch of millet into the surface. If the grains sink swiftly, the water is pure. If they float, it's deemed unfit and left to camels or sometimes given to local shepherds. Scholars still debate whether medieval travelers understood the gypsum test as genuine mineral assay or adopted it as a convenient ritual to reassure anxious mouths. You trudge to the edge of the well where camels crouch in a half circle, their muzzles extended to lap at the cool water. Careful handlers tilt the goatskin pouches, dribbling water onto parched lips. In mainstream veterinary texts, this slow dribble prevented water shock in dehydrated animals, avoiding fatal bloating. Yet fringe herders' verses advise adding a few drops of camel's own urine back into the water to remind the body of familiar salts, an unverified practice scholars still debate as healing mimicry or mythic self-poisoning. Once camels have slaked their thirst, you trudge to fill your own pouch. You feel the goatskin's cool weight against your belly, a promise of life for the next 20 solo miles. You cap the pouch and tuck it inside your robe, knowing every sip must be measured, one for midday, one at sunset, and one saved for starlit watches before dawn. Beyond the well, you trudge to a cluster of mud brick shelters where local shepherds have laid out jugs of rain-collected water in the hope of barter. These rarely appear fair weather stalls, usually collapse before winter rains. Yet today you spot one dusty urn, its neck sealed with palm frond binding. A shepherd demands a half slab of salt for a single jug, an astronomical rate, but in the desert, even goat-nosed suppliants command high prices. Mainstream trade records note that oasis-dwelling shepherds often overpriced water to discourage caravans from lingering, conserving scarce supplies. Fringe merchant diaries condemn these water tolls as petty extortion or necessary stewardship. Historians still debate whether such practices were regulated by desert law or left to rough custom. You trudge back to the well's lip just as a second well keeper arrives with bamboo buckets. He lowers them on knotted leather ropes to the murmuring aquifer, then hoists them with a slow, steady tug. In mainstream accounts, wells were deepened and lined during the 11th century under Ghana and Mali's sponsorship, ensuring more reliable flows. Yet fringe Tuareg petroglyphs claim that these same wells were first dug 5,000 years ago by vanished peoples, their knowledge encoded in desert art. Some scholars argue these datings reflect actual prehistoric wells. Others see mythic overstatement. Caravans also relied on water caches, buried goatskin pouches, and hidden jars spaced every 10 miles across dunes. You trudge to a marked stash hidden under a sunken dune, its entrance flagged by a lone thorn bush. Digging a shallow hole, you unearth a leather cask, its hide cracked, but still holding half its volume. In mainstream navigation rhetoric, such caches prevented stragglers from perishing in heat. Yet burying spots risked shifting dunes, swallowing markers, leading to forgotten caches and fatal misadventures. Fringe survival manuals advise placing small stone cairns atop each cache for remarking an innovation some caravaneers adopted, though scholars still debate its prevalence. By late afternoon, as sun dips toward the western dunes, you trudge back to your camel train, ready to ration out evening sips. Guides instruct each traveler to unscrew pouches in rotation, first the night guard, then the rear camel handler, ensuring all watches receive minimal refreshment. Mainstream caravan etiquette dictated this strict order. Breaking it once could end in night mutiny. Fringe anecdotal tales whisper of desperate travelers hoarding water in hidden pouches only to be found abandoned at dawn's patrol. Scholars still consider these stories moral warnings or vestiges of true crises. You trudge alongside a veteran guide who pauses at a thorn bush well marker and taps his staff thrice, whispering a prayer of thanks. Moments later, you sip the last warm draft before moonrise. Each drop tastes of hope and hardship, a link between distant markets and this bone-dry crucible. Because in medieval Saharan trade, water rations and wells were not mere logistics. They were a sacred calculus of life and death, ritual respect, and ruthless necessity guiding salt caravans across the desert heart, where liquid gold meant survival against scorching days and freezing nights. You trudge away from the well's lifeline and fall in behind the weary camel train as it winds into the late afternoon sun, each animal's gait a labor of stoic endurance beneath its briny burden. Their padded feet sink into soft sand and gravel in tandem, a muted chorus of thumps and creaks echoing across the dunes. In medieval caravan lore, These sounds were as vital as oases alerts signaling fatigue injury or impending collapse. This is the domain of camels, creak and collapse, the grim symphony of beastly toil in the Sahara's crucible. Mainstream accounts from 13th century Tuareg chronicles record that a healthy dromedary laden with 80 to 120 pounds of salt could maintain a steady walk of 3 miles per hour, 8 hours a day over hard ground. But these accounts also emphasize camel physiology. Their broad-cushioned hooves spread weight, evenly preventing sinking, while their double-rowed eyelashes and seal-like nostrils defend against blowing sand. You trudge close enough to place your hand on a camel's flank, feeling the taut muscles beneath its coarse hide, each breath a slow heave, each step measured and deliberate. Yet even the sturdiest camels cannot endure Sahara's extremes indefinitely. Fringe herder, tales speak of dust, collapse when overloaded beasts would suddenly buckle their legs, giving way as if pulled by unseen weights. Guides say this occurs when long marches combine with the desert's fine grit sand that infiltrates joints, abrades tissue, and causes crippling arthritis. Scholars still debate whether medieval caravans recognized dust collapse as a distinct malady, or simply recorded dying camels as fodder losses. You trudge alongside a collapsing camel whose load has shifted salt slabs, tilting to one side. The beast flicks its tail, flares its nostrils, and stomps a forefoot in protest before bending its knees and sinking slowly onto the sand. Handlers scramble to its head, soothing it with gentle taps and whispered commands. Mainstream veterinary texts of the era mention leg drift, a gradual misalignment of pastern joints, treated by unfastening panniers and massaging camel fat ointment into the chestnut glands. Yet fringe camel lore prescribes wrapping the animal's fetlocks with cloth dipped in date palm resin, believed to harden weak tissues overnight. Historians still argue whether any effective treatments existed or if collapse simply preceded the animal's slow end. As you trudge to assist a handler, slices open a leather strap with a short knife, letting henniers slide free and clatter onto the sand. The camel exhales a tortured grunt, then lies panting, eyes half-lidded against the sun. You trudge to gather long palm fiber ropes prepared for exactly this scenario and slip a loop under its torso to brace the slump. Guides lift on 3 sides, slowly righting the camel as it struggles upright. Mainstream labor accounts note that reloading a collapsed camel could take 20 men and half an hour of careful leverage, delaying the caravan and endangering its schedule. Yet fringe anecdotes claim some handlers used camel charms, amulets of iron and amber hung around the beast's neck to embolden struggling camels to rise. Scholars still debate whether charms impacted camel psychology or served only as symbolic hope. A second camel stumbles its hind foot, catching an unseen rock beneath sand. It collapses backward with a jarring thud that sends salt slabs tumbling. Handlers rush to flip it forward before it injures its spine. You trudge to secure its legs with padded straps, positioning wooden poles beneath its belly to hoist it upright. Mainstream rescue protocols recorded in 12th century caravan manuals stress the need for immediate offloading of weight and a gradual lifting angle to avoid internal injury. Fringe survival scrolls insist on tying a fresh sheepskin beneath the camel's chest to cradle it mid-lift, a detail scholars still argue arose from practical need or pastoral charm. Other camels watch with low grumbles, scenting peril in the air. You trudge back to the collapsed animal's side and administer water-soaked barley mash to coax strength into its maw. Tuareg waterkeepers believe that moist grain provides faster energy absorption than plain water. Mainstream nutritional treatises confirm barley's glycemic kick can revive weakened beasts, yet handlers caution against overfeeding, which risks bloating and fatal gastric torsion. Historians still discuss whether medieval guides understood these digestive risks or learned only through trial and grievous error. As the stricken camels stagger back to their feet, handlers pack wedges of carved wood beneath each foot to stretch tense tendons. The animals stand stiff-legged for minutes before limping off, reassembled and reloaded. You trudge along, stepping over splintered salt slabs and scattered ropes, noting the caravan's staggered rhythm as stronger camels lead and weaker ones follow in guarded ranks. By late afternoon, you trudge past a council of elders convened under a lone acacia's sparse shade. They discuss offloading sick camels into remote pens for recovery, leaving minimal watchmen behind. Mainstream caravan records reveal such choices often split groups into fast and slow-moving halves, risking isolation for laggards. Yet, fringe tribal ballads honor these decisions as tests of communal loyalty, believing any camel too weak to continue belonged to the Earth's dunes rather than human commerce. Scholars still debate whether abandoned camels thrived in desert camps or perished, and whether communal bonds frayed under such duress. As the sun sinks, you trudge to the vanguard again, each camel's limp, a stark reminder that the Sahara's weight is heavier than mere salt. The caravan presses on slower now, guided by experienced hands and tacit hope that tomorrow's sands prove kinder. Because in medieval Saharan trade, camels' creak and collapse were not mere caravan setbacks. They were elemental tests of animal resilience, human compassion, and the business of survival, where beast and man alike carried burdens beyond salt, testing the limits of endurance beneath the desert sun. You trudge out from the wadi's sparse greenery and into a broad salt pan where dozens of workers crouch amid piles of crystallized brine, their calloused hands chiseling at towering mounds of white blocks. Each block, once roughly hewn, is carried to nearby stonemason platforms where it transforms into a dense, uniform salt brick essential cargo for desert trade. That is the grueling craft of salt brick forging, where crude slabs become the coveted white gold crossing the Sahara. In mainstream Tagaza's salt mining manuals, transmitted orally among Tuareg salt masters, each brick measured 1 cubit square by half a cubit's thickness, weighing between 15 and 20 pounds when properly compressed. You trudge to a low wooden bench where 2 smiths pound rough slabs with stout iron-headed mallets, driving out air pockets and smoothing edges. Consistent weight and shape, where vital, imprecise bricks could shift in camel panniers, causing dangerous load imbalances on dune traverses. Historical caravan inventories from 13th century Gao list average brick counts per camel, precisely underscoring the standardization's importance for safe transport. Yet amid the rhythmic pounding fringe, lore speaks of blood, bricks secretly soaked in camel blood before forging, believed to strengthen the salt's cohesion and ward off rapid disintegration under shifting sands. A marginal Tuareg ballad warns that bricks soaked in human blood, however cursed caravans with misfortune and dissolution of loads. Scholars still debate whether any credible evidence exists for blood-treated salt bricks, or whether these tales emerged as metaphorical warnings against ruthless greed. You trudge closer to the block press, a crude assembly of wooden planks bound with rope. Workers tilt a wedge-shaped lever, forcing the slab into a hollow frame that compresses the salt further. Mainstream engineering treatises from medieval Tunis recommend using thornwood levers, flexible yet strong, to achieve uniform pressure. Yet a fringe mason's lodge verse advises soaking frames in camel fat lard before each press, claiming it reduced friction and prevented bricks from sticking. Historians still argue whether lard-lubricated molds formed part of authentic practice or belonged to inventive folklore. Once pressed, the bricks moved to a drying rack built of palm timbers raised above ground to allow airflow on all sides. You trudge to inspect a rack where fresh bricks, gleaming with condensation from morning humidity, sit side by side. Merchant guides insist that bricks must dry for exactly 3 days and nights before transport. Any sooner, and residual moisture could cause spoilage, turning salt brittle or fostering algae growth under rare fog. Yet a fringe caravan memo suggests that bricks moon dried left uncovered on full moon nights achieved better crystallization by lunar influence. Scholars still debate whether moonlight drying ever featured in pragmatic routines or remained a poetic add-on to nighttime lore. A gust of wind kicks up, trailing dust and salt crystals swirling around your ankles like miniature whirlwinds of white. You trudge over to secure bricks against gust-driven collapse, with palm fiber twine laced through square holes carved in each brick's top edge. Mainstream records note that these tie holes allowed bricks to be lashed in neat stacks on camels' backs. Yet fringe maritime treatises jokingly referred to these holes as sea anchors, quipping that on brief sea crossings of inland lakes, bricks might be thrown overboard to steady small boats. Historians still debate whether such water crossings ever occurred or simply amused itinerant sailors and masons. Midday approaches, and the desert's heat ripples across the pan. You trudge to join workers who lift dried bricks onto camel panniers, stacking them in interlocking layers to prevent slippage. Each camel carries between 90 and 100 bricks its load, balanced by careful brick placement. Mainstream veterinary accounts endorse interlocking for load stability, yet fringe loading manuals propose alternating brick orientations, salt face to iron, face to enhance stacking strength. Scholars still argue whether such crosshatch patterns offered measurable stability or remained theoretical. Beyond sheer weight, the salt's purity determined each brick's value. You trudge to a small sieve station where a handful of powdered salt from broken bricks undergoes hand sifting through palm-woven sieves. Any sand or clay fleck is discarded. Pure white crystals command premium rates in Timbuktu markets. In mainstream merchant ledgers, bulk purity percentages appear alongside brick tallies, underscoring the critical role of on-site quality control. Yet a fringe fraternity of salt appraisers insisted on a taste test, tasting a grain to detect miner's earthiness, an unreliable method historians still debate as dangerous hyperbole or genuine nomadic tradition. As shadows lengthen, you trudge toward a final station where bricks are branded with the stamp of the caravan's sponsoring clan, simple, geometric patterns burned into each face with heated iron. This seal guaranteed authenticity and weight compliance, deterring illicit brick substitutes. Mainstream legal codes enforced harsh penalties for tampering with caravan seals. Yet a clandestine rebel poem celebrates a rogue appraiser who replaced seals with his own mark, an act of personal protest scholars still argue reflects isolated dissent or widespread underground market manipulation. Finally, you trudge beneath a low arch of stacked bricks, forming a makeshift archway, every caravan's ceremonial threshold before departure. Guides and merchants pause here to offer prayers of thanks, sprinkling a few grains of powdered salt at the arch's base and reciting a brief blessing. Mainstream caravan etiquette sees this as a collective gesture of solidarity. Fringe ritualists claim the arch served as a salt gate, a metaphysical portal granting caravans passage out of the desert realm into the world of markets and civilization. Historians still discuss whether such arches ever held ritual weight or belonged to later poetic reconstructions. Because in medieval Saharan trade, salt brick forging was not mere industrial labor. It was alchemy of wind, sun, and craft ritual and practicality fused into each paneled block that bore the desert's essence and carried it across dunes to distant cities thirsting for the taste of Tagaza's white treasure. You trudge onward at dawn's first flush beyond the salt pan arches, the camel's padded hooves stirring pale dust under an awakening sky. Yet even as the sun peaks above distant dunes, the true peril of this crossing often lies not in sand or thirst, but in human malice. Bandit ambush. Superstitions shadow every mile of the desert highway. In mainstream caravan chronicles, from the repertoire of Gao's merchant scribes to the campfire tales of Tuareg guides, desperate highwaymen lurk beyond every dune crest, drawn by the gleam of salt-laden camels and the promise of ransom. Caravans habitually hired armed escorts, mounted riders, clad in hardened leather, and brandishing long spears, their watchful eyes scanning the horizon. You trudge among these guards as they fan out in pairs along the flanks, their keen gazes flicking between dunes and sky ears, attuned to the faintest hoofbeat or shifting sand. Yet alongside these tangible defenses, a tapestry of ambush superstitions guided behavior and often saved lives. Caravan masters carried small iron bells tied to camel halters jingling softly at night to ward off silent attackers. Mainstream reports note that sudden jingles alerted guards to stealthy intruders. Fringe lore claims the bell's metallic chime summoned desert jinn to scare bandits away. Scholars still debate whether the use of bells derived from pragmatic alarm devices or grew from willful belief in supernatural safeguards. You trudge toward the caravan's center, where an old guard holds a carved wooden talisman, an obsidian shard etched with the image of a coiled snake. Before departure, each guard pressed it to their forehead, a ritual said to grant the vigilance of serpents. Mainstream studies of West African magical traditions confirm snake imagery signified watchfulness. Yet fringe ethnographers maintain that only at new moon did the talisman's power peak, a rule scrupulously observed by superstitious couriers. Historians still argue whether moon-timed talismans featured in actual guard routines or emerged in later travelers' accounts. As the morning sun climbs, you trudge to the lead camel's flank, where the guide unsheathes a small mirror of polished bronze. He angles it toward the desert's glare, using sun reflections to scan behind dunes for suspicious shapes. Mainstream desert warfare manuals copied in medieval Moroccan kasbahs describe such mirrors as early reconnaissance tools. Yet fringe military memoirs warn that mirror flashes could also betray a caravan's position to eagle-eyed bandits miles away. Scholars still debate whether mirror use was widespread or phased out in favor of stealth. You trudge across a narrow corridor between two dunes known locally as the Devil's Gate, a notorious ambush spot. Caravan elders avoid this passage at high noon, believing the gate channels wicked spirits and brigands into one funnel. In practice, they scheduled crossings at dawn and dusk when long shadows obscured human shapes. Mainstream caravan logs confirm route deviations to avoid this choke point. Yet fringe ballads claim that a lone guard once stood at the gate's center, chanting an incantation that turned would-be attackers to stone. Scholars still discuss whether any historical ambushes led to no-shows fueling petrifaction myths, or if such tales serve to dramatize desert's spiritual menace. Suddenly, a faint echo reaches your ears, a low rhythmic hoofbeat, not matching the caravan's steady pace. You trudge toward the flank as guards snap into action, raising shields and spears in tight formation. Camels panic at the clatter, braying and kicking. Through a haze of rising dust, shadowy shapes emerge, bandits on swift barbs, charging from behind a dune lip. The escort forms a shield wall. You trudge to brace a shield edge, heart hammering, as spears shiver in their sockets and dust spirals. Yet in that chaos, ingrained superstitions kick in. Before confrontation, guards spit 3 times to the wind, an act said to deflect evil arrows. Mainstream accounts note that spitting distracted attackers momentarily. Fringe accounts insist it actually offended jinn allies of bandits, causing arrows to veer off course. Scholars still debate whether spitting held any practical benefit or remained a symbolic gesture born of deep-seated desert beliefs. Arrows whistle past, cutting tufts of camel hair. You trudge to hurl a clay pot filled with burning date fiber embers over the shields and into the attacker's path. Flames flare, sand boils under searing heat. Mainstream tactics credit fire pots with breaking ambush formations. Fringe tales claim the smoke summoned protective smoke jinn who buffeted horses backward. Historians still question whether caravans trained to deploy fire pots systematically, or if their successful uses inspired jinn-infused myths. Within moments, riders on camel and horse crash into the bandits' flanks, spears and blades flashing. The ambush collapses swiftly as attackers break into retreat. You trudge through swirling dust, heart pounding, as guards rally the caravan and search for wounded. Tallying losses. The escort chants a victory prayer, 2 parts Quranic verse, 1 part pre-Islamic desert, charm invoking the palm's protection. Scholarship remains split on whether these hybrid prayers officially formed in medieval Tuareg courts or arose later as scholarly reconstructions of oral traditions. As the adrenaline fades, you trudge back to your camel brushing sand from your tunic. Each moment in this narrow corridor renewed respect for both martial skill and the desert's unseen forces, where survival demanded knowledge of both spears and spirits. Because in medieval Saharan trade, bandit ambush superstitions were not mere folklore, They were woven into every route choice, weapon drill, and communal chant, forming a safeguard that blended practical defense with spiritual warding to carry precious salt across the world's most daunting highway. You trudge beyond the ambush corridor as twilight's violet haze deepens and the caravan edges into the shadow of a low, ramshackle fortress perched on a desert knoll. This is the Saharan Trade Laws checkpoint, where salt transforms from raw cargo into taxable treasure under local edicts. Lanterns flicker behind crenellated walls of sun-baked mud brick, and guards armed with curved swords and spears watch your approach with steely eyes. In mainstream 13th century Maghrebi legal codes, each caravan paid tolls based on weight and purity of its salt, recorded in grimmed ledgers by porters known as amil. You trudge to a wooden counter where a stern clerk weighs representative bricks on iron scales calibrated against stamped bronze weights, each seal bearing the Sultan's emblem. Scribes tally gross and net loads, deducting a fixed carriage tax of 1/12 the total, then affix wax seals to parchment permits. Only with these sealed scrolls may the caravan proceed toward Timbuktu or Gao. Yet beyond dry taxation lay fringe traditions of shadow fees, whispered surcharges levied on the sly by border guards hungry for extra dates and goat cheese. Caravaneers murmured that toll takers sometimes demanded a private gift, salt slab, an unrecorded brick slipped beneath the counter to speed inspections. Scholars still debate whether such informal levies were isolated abuses or systemic fixtures in frontier economies. As you trudge through a low archway into the fortress courtyard, you see merchants huddled over lantern-lit tables, negotiating treaty waivers known as Aman, temporary safe conduct letters, permitting passage through tribal territories. Mainstream diplomatic dispatches confirm that Aman letters, endorsed by local emirs and judges, protected caravans from banditry and arbitrary seizure. Yet fringe rumor credits certain emirs with forging Aman on back of envelope scraps, creating ghost Amans that proved worthless when genuine escorts failed to appear. Historians still argue whether forgeries ever gained practical utility or lingered as cautionary lore about misplaced trust. You trudge up a ladder to an elevated platform where a cluster of local notables, cloaked in indigo turbans and leopard skin vests, sit behind low tables. They inspect caravan lists, nod curtly, and stamp permits with heavy iron seals, each stroke echoing across the courtyard. Mainstream chronicles note that these officials rotated annually to prevent entrenched corruption, though some clerk families secured multi-generation tenures through marriage alliances. Yet fringe genealogies insist that certain clerk dynasties bore secret royal blood, granting them privilege to surcharge at will, an assertion historians still debate as political rumor or hidden fact. Beside the platform, you trudge over to a small shrine dedicated to Baraka's spirit of lawful commerce, where merchants toss grains of coffee as offerings. Mainstream ethnographers describe Baraka rituals blending Islamic prayer with pre-Islamic animist rites to bless transactions. Yet marginal travelers' poems caution that omitting Baraka offerings invited trading misfortune, tumbling scales, spoiled salt, or stalling camels. Scholars still question whether Baraka rites formed official practice or survived only in whispered caravan gossip. Once all permits are sealed, you trudge to reclaim your camels. Handlers lift lead ropes and guide beasts through a narrow gate into the desert night. Mainstream trade routes required exit inspections to prevent salt resale within taxed regions. A second sealing marked the caravan's formal departure from the emirate. Yet fringe tales recall a cunning merchant who slipped duplicate permits into hidden saddle pouches, allowing a second ghost caravan to retrace the same route, doubling profit. Historians still debate whether any evidence supports such double-dipping schemes or if they belonged to inventive cautionary tales. You trudge out across a flat, stony plain where sentinel-like acacia trees, planted centuries ago by earlier traders, mark the corridor between forts. Each tree once bore metal tags bearing emirate names. Now only rusted remnants cling to trunks. Mainstream road-building chronicles attribute these trees as part of state efforts to establish reliable trade arteries. Fringe environmental studies credit caravaneers' desire for shaded halts as planting motive. Scholars still argue whether the tree's origins lie in royal edicts or grassroots camel driver initiatives. As the moon rises, you trudge on under star-bright skies, permits tucked in your sash, salt strapped secure. The fortress recedes behind you, its torchlight a fading heartbeat in the desert gloom. Ahead lie more checkpoints, each with its own laws, edicts, and whispered surcharges, but for tonight you press on, buoyed by official seals and shadow warnings alike. Because in medieval Saharan trade laws and tolls were not mere formalities, they were rituals of power, structures of trust and suspicion, weaving caravans into a tapestry of politics, profit, and survival across the desert's vast expanse. You trudge away from the adobe fortress and into the open plain dotted with tufts of golden grass, where the horizon's heat shimmer conceals both promise and peril. Ahead you spy the slender silhouettes of Tuareg tents near a rocky outcrop, an uneasy refuge where traders negotiate with nomadic hosts. This is the realm of nomad alliance and conflict, where salt caravans forged tenuous pacts with desert wanderers or faced betrayal beneath star-bright skies. Mainstream caravan chronicles record that Tuareg tribes, masters of the desert's rhythms, often controlled stretches of the salt routes. Caravans paid tribute in camel's silver or prized cloth for safe passage across tribal lands. You trudge to the edge of a ring of tents, where a Tuareg emir draped in indigo tegelmus greets the caravan leader. They exchange solemn greetings, each man's eyes calculating trust and power. The emir's men draw close, inspecting camel loads for concealed salt reserves, any hidden bricks, violated treaty terms. Yet beyond formal tribute lay fringe stories of nightly slips, clandestine negotiations under moonlight, where caravans paid double tribute to an allied clan in exchange for local guides who led them past rival ambush points. These guides, known as shadow marshals, memorized every dune's secret, slipping ahead of the train to scout while cloaked in desert robes. Scholars still debate whether shadow marshals formed an organized corps or existed only in whispered merchant tales of survival against overwhelming odds. You trudge into the campfire glow where the emir and wali sit cross-legged on woven mats. They share thin dates and bitter tea brewed over a low brazier, each sip a symbol of fleeting camaraderie. Mainstream diplomatic treatises from Timbuktu note that such shared rations forged blood oaths, spilling a drop of tea on the sand sealed mutual respect. Yet fringe liner books scrawl that some caravans mingled date wine with tea, an illicit indulgence said to lubricate words and loosen tongues, risking overpledge of salt tribute. Historians still argue whether wine-tea fusions ever punctuated serious treaty talks or remained poetic hyperbole among garrulous merchants. A young Tuareg scout approaches you with an offered dagger, its slender blade inscribed with protective runes, inviting you to accept a nameless oath against betrayal. Mainstream ethnological studies confirm that exchanging blades symbolized life-debt bonds. Yet fringe anthropologists contend that some oaths bound only the traveler, not the tribe, creating a dangerous illusion of mutual fate. Scholars still debate whether blade swearing ever enforced true tribal loyalty or served mainly as psychological comfort. You trudge to examine a sketched map laid out on goatskin parchment routes, marked in iron oxide routes through vaster dunes that caravans dared only with Tuareg guides. The map notes past skirmishes, crossed swords marking failed alliances, red dots for lost caravans that never returned. Mainstream cartography archives contain few such maps. Desert navigation favored oral lore over static records. Yet fringe map fragments found in hidden shrine caches suggest a deeper secret cartographic tradition one scholars still dispute for authenticity versus forgery by treasure seekers. As dawn's pale glow returns, you trudge with the caravan's clerk to register the alliance. 2 camels exchanged as host's fee, a formal handshake, and the carving of symbols into a date palm trunk witness. Mainstream legal codes mandated this record as binding, yet fringe folklore insists that a final midnight whistle from a shepherd's reed sealed the pact in desert winds unheard by human ears. Historians still argue whether auditory rituals accompanied treaty signings or belong to romantic retellings of intangible desert magic. By midday, you trudge onward under the watchful gaze of your new Tuareg guides, their nimble camels gliding across sand as if born of the dunes themselves. Conflict, however, remained a constant threat. Rival clans eyed the caravan's wealth and skirmishes erupted when oaths faltered. You trudge past a hastily erected cairn, its stones marking a skirmish site where fierce blade exchanges once stained the sand red. The guide murmurs of fallen travelers, salt sacks left torn and scattered. Mainstream conflict accounts record these as punitive ambushes aimed at enforcing tribute. Fringe ballads lament them as tragic betrayals of desert hospitality. Scholars still debate whether such battles were strategic or rooted in code breaches rendered invisible by time. As dusk's shadows lengthen, you trudge beyond the nomad camp, each step a testament to fragile alliances forged and broken. Under star-dappled skies, you feel the shifting sands beneath an echo of shifting loyalties above. You trudge from the nomad camp's wavering lantern glow into a gargantuan open-air bazaar where camel caravans converge upon a bustling oasis trading post. Tents and stalls sprawl in every direction, draped with vibrant cloths and crates of goods bound for distant kingdoms. Here Salt's journey reaches a pivotal crossroads. Salt for gold exchanges, where white bricks become coin and power. In mainstream trans-Saharan trade, records caravans from Tagaza carried salt to markets in Gao Timbuktu and beyond, bartering for gold dust ivory and cola nuts. You trudge along rows of low tables laden with scales and leather pouches where merchants from the Sahel and forest kingdoms negotiate prices by weight. A Tarqua gold trader lifts a handful of fine, amber-glinting dust, holding it up to the sun. A caravan merchant counters with a single salt slab, marking its notches with finger-carved marks to attest purity. Historical account books note that in the 13th century, a single salt brick could command a half-gram of gold, enough to feed a family for a month. Yet amid these bustling exchanges rose fringe tales of the mirror scale trick in which cunning merchants used a polished bronze dish to reflect shimmering salt and simulate gold's sparkle. A passing Tuareg poet warns that those dazzled by reflected light sold their salt for worthless lead dust, condemned to wander the dunes empty-handed. Scholars still debate whether such mirror-scale scams occurred or remained cautionary myths added to traders' lore to warn against greed clouding judgment. You trudge past a low pavilion where a mossy gold broker unfolds a length of goatskin lined with thin gold sheets imported from Bambook's inland rivers and stamps them with leafy motifs. These gold sheets, known as tala, were weighed and cut into standard units before sale. Mainstream metallurgical studies confirm that Tala refined to nearly 95% purity facilitated easier sliding through scales. Yet an obscure traveler's log alleges that some Tala contained bits of quartz to bulk up weight detected only by experts tasting the metal's mouthfeel. Historians still argue whether chalky speckled gold ever infiltrated mainstream trade or lingered in whispered accusations among rival dealers. You trudge onward to a water trough where sellers rinse gold dust in shallow basins to reveal its true gleam. Droplets of water cascade as they swirl brine-staining salt out, leaving the denser gold to settle beneath. Caravan records insist upon feet rinsing cycles. Brine fresh water, then vinegar and acidic final wash said to remove trace impurities. Yet fringe apothecary scribes recommend adding a pinch of ground tamarind seed to the third rinse, claiming it dissolves stubborn clay particles lodged in gold crevices. Scholars still debate whether tamarind rinses formed practical refinements or belonged to botanical hopeful thinking. Beyond the rinsing tables, you trudge to a circle of merchants seated on mats, each holding measuring cubes carved with cubic inch markings. They pass a set of calibrated weights, iron cubes stamped with mint seals, and negotiate the final tally. In mainstream trade, one weight equaled roughly 2 grams of gold dust, a standard set by the Songhai Empire. But a fringed tale spins of a merchant who secretly engraved micro-notches on one cube's face, altering its mass by fractions and skimming thousands of gold grains before detection. Historians still weigh whether any legal cases ever surfaced regarding such microscopic tampering, or if those stories grew into exaggerated warnings. Nearby, a Berber caravan leader raises his palm to signal his turn. He counts out 14 salt bricks onto the trader's scale, then sweeps his hand through a pouch of coarse gold nuggets, letting them rain into the other pan. The balance teeters. You trudge closer to see dust glinting between sunflecks. A hush falls as each grain drops into place. The broker grunts, nods, and snaps fingers a signal to finalize the deal. With a flick of a leather strap, he marks the salt offering with charcoal mentions in his ledger, fueling long-term credit arrangements that would sway caravan fortunes for years. As transactions continue around you, you trudge to observe the exchange of other goods alongside salt and gold exotic cloth from Morocco kola nuts from the forest and ivory tusks carved by artists of Congo. Yet even in these varied trades, salt for gold remains the town square's heart. A loud clang rings out as a merchant stamps the final seal on a caravan's joint contract, granting safe conduct letters that tie both trader and host to communal law for the journey ahead. Dusk gathers on the horizon. You trudge away from the din, gold-laden pouches, secured salt slabs, now distant memory. Beyond lies the desert, once more wild dunes awaiting the next stage, carrying goods and hopes toward ocean ports and sovereign courts. Because in medieval Saharan trade, salt for gold exchanges were not mere market deals. They were alchemical rituals of trust scales and sparks forging bonds across cultures and climates as caravans wove white bricks into the tapestry of global wealth. You trudge from the bustling exchange grounds at dusk and press on as the caravan enters a wide plain dotted with scrub and broken stones. Camels' padded hooves echo softly against the gravel, and the air grows thick with dust kicked up by many feet and paws. Ahead, a low hill rises like a sentinel. This is the notorious Plague Ridge, where disease and dust combine to fell both man and beast. Here, you confront the twin scourges of disease and dung dust in the desert's relentless expanse. In mainstream medieval Saharan chronicles and caravan medical guides, the desert's dust laden with dried dung from camels and goats harbored microscopic pathogens that triggered respiratory ailments and fevers. You trudge up the ridge's flank each breath, bringing gritty particles into your lungs, stinging your throat like embers. Camel drivers warn of the dust cough, a hacking affliction that began as mild throat itch before blossoming into chest-constricting fits. Without rest or cleaner air, coughs turned into deadly fevers within days. Historians still debate whether caravan routes ever incorporated purpose-built windbreak camps to mitigate this risk, or if travelers simply gritted through the dust. You trudge to a ragged tent pitched at the ridge's crest, where a caravan medic tends to an ailing camel, its flanks heaving with rasping breaths. The medic, a shoemaker turned healer, smears a paste of crushed camel dung and desert clay onto the animal's chest, believing the mixture drew out lung irritants. Mainstream veterinary writings from Andalusian scholars note that clay poultices offered cooling relief to inflammation, but warned that dung's bacteria risked secondary infection. Yet fringe herders' scrolls insist that dung's ammonia fumes killed dust-borne microbes outright, a claim modern microbiologists still question as accidental antisepsis or folk overreach. Nearby, you trudge to a low bench where a traveler lies shivering beneath a threadbare blanket, his skin flushed and eyes glassy. He clutches a wooden bowl of boiling barley gruel mixed with camel's milk. In mainstream caravan recipes, such gruel provided easy nutrition during fevers, delivering calories and soothing parched throats. Yet fringe desert medic poems prescribe adding pulverized goat hoof ash to the gruel, a sterility charm thought to burn away invisible disease spirits. Historians still argue whether hoof ash additions ever saw practical use or existed only in poetic warnings against dread afflictions. As you trudge past, a sudden wind gust rattles the tent's cloth, sending up fresh clouds of dung-laden dust. The sick traveler coughs violently, spittle flecked with reddish grains. He grasps a leather strap and pulls free a small pouch of frankincense chips, dropping them into the gruel's last spoonful. Mainstream medieval pharmacopoeias recognize frankincense's mild anti-inflammatory properties, yet the scent's primary use lay in masking odors of death and decay. Fringe caravan rituals held that inhaling incense smoke guarded lungs against the plague dust's worst effects. Scholars still debate whether frankincense actually impacted survival rates or served chiefly to lift spirits amid despair. Further along the ridge, you trudge to a circle of makeshift latrines, shallow pits ringed by camel saddles. Caravan etiquette dictated latrines be placed downwind to avert foul miasmas guided by prevailing desert breezes. Yet fringe miasma theorists insisted that dung dust rising from these pits carried disease spirits that could drift miles on still nights, prompting some travelers to avoid latrines altogether and suffer worse afflictions. Historians still debate whether miasma fears influenced pit locations or remained cautionary lore overshadowed by practical hygiene concerns. You trudge down from the ridge into a narrow wash where desert rains sometimes pool an ephemeral hazard known as a dust whirlpool. After a rare downpour, dried dung and clay form slick mud traps that swallow camel legs. You carefully navigate the wash, feeling the gravel shift beneath each step. Mainstream caravan logs recount camels lost to these slick pits, leading to delays, while handlers dug them free. Yet fringe hazard manuals warn that such dusty whirlpools carried unseen microbes that lingered in the mud, infecting any who ventured in. Scholars still argue whether disease clusters emerged from mud trap injuries or from broader dust exposure. By late afternoon, you trudge toward the ridge's opposite side, where a small spring bubbles beneath a pile of stones, an unlikely haven. Guides call it healing waters, claiming its mineral content counteracted the plague dust's toxins. You stoop to fill a leather jug, tasting the water's cool sweetness tinged with salt. Mainstream geochemical surveys of Saharan springs confirm trace minerals like magnesium and calcium can soothe digestive distress and mild fevers. Yet, fringe medical fragments insist that healing waters erased coughs in a single night, a miraculous cure scholars still question as hyperbole or exceptional anomaly. As dusk falls, you trudge into a guarded camp at the oasis edge. Here instructors teach dust mask weaving, simple cloth wraps soaked in vinegar and charcoal dust believed to trap pathogens. You watch apprentices thread goat hair into linen masks, adjusting fits under borrowed lantern light. Mainstream medical treatises laud charcoal and vinegar's absorbent qualities. Fringe journals assert that goat hair's lanolin added antiseptic lipid barriers, but scholars debate whether any mask genuinely reduced disease or if their comfort lay in perceived protection. Beyond the camp's firelight, the ridge's silhouette stands sentinel against swirling sand. You trudge back to your camel, brushing ash and dung off your garment's lungs, heavy with the day's trials. Each breath recalls the ridge's specter of disease and dust, a reminder that the Sahara's greatest foe could be the very dust underfoot. Because in medieval Saharan trade, disease and dung dust were not mere background perils, they were relentless adversaries, shaping routes, rituals, and remedies, demanding caravanners blend ingenuity, faith, and grit to prevail against the desert's unseen scourges. You trudge down the final rise out of the desert's boiling heart into a ribbon of cultivated fields shimmering in golden twilight. The air here carries a hint of riverine life. Palm groves rustle with freshwater breezes, and distant laughter drifts from a cluster of mud brick buildings crowned with conical roofs. This is arrival at Timbuktu, where medieval salt caravans crossed the threshold from wilderness into the beating heart of Sahelian trade. In mainstream chronicles, Sanhaja annals, Songhai court records, and Moroccan traveler accounts, Timbuktu emerged in the 13th century as an entrepot of gold, salt, and ivory, its docks lining the Niger's calm waters. You trudge along a narrow lane of packed earth toward the city's bustling quay. Laden pirogues drift in the dusk, tipped low by granite stones used as ballast. Merchants call greetings in Songhai Arabic and Tamashek as you pass. The caravan unloads camels under the watchful eyes of port officials, their ledgers ready to record each brick's arrival. Yet beyond official welcome lay fringed tales of river spirits, invisible guardians of the Niger, who guided safe passage through treacherous sandbars. Before docking, caravan guides dipped sacred palm fronds into the river and floated them downstream, believing that spirits would whisper hidden currents to the boatmen. Scholars still debate whether such rituals had any practical nautical benefit or served solely to foster communal faith as boats glided across shifting channels. You trudge across the quay to a row of merchants' stalls draped in dyed cottons and furs. Here, salt bricks are weighed again once by measure, then by eye. A silver-skinned trader runs his fingers along a brick's edge, judging its grain by touch before stamping it with his clan's seal. Mainstream trade agreements demanded twofold inspection to prevent tax disputes. Fringe memoirs suggest that some traders paid gratitude fees, rare gifts of honey, and dates to local waymasters to ensure favorable assessments. Historians still argue whether such gratuities formed customary practice or opportunistic bribery. Morning markets near the Great Mosque ring with calls for prices of salt, gold, and slaves. You trudge through winding alleys to the Salt Exchange Hall, a vaulted courtyard ringed with columns where vast ledgers record each transaction. Here, caravan merchants unfurl goatskin parchments bearing their desert seals and exchange salt for sacks of gold dust now measured in specialized leather counterweights. Mainstream epigraphic finds include fragments of these parchments, though many remain lost beneath shifting sands. Yet fringe stories speak of cursed contracts, scrolls scribed on donkey skin that carried bad luck invoked when traders cheated 40 days before a safe return. Scholars still debate whether cursed contracts ever served to punish or remained tales to enforce honesty. As the sun climbs, you trudge to the Sankore Madrasa, where scholars pore over Quranic texts in leather-bound Caravans. You pause beside a low bench where students copy trade treaties in precise Maghrebi script contracts, legitimizing caravan routes and alliances. Mainstream educational histories credit Timbuktu's madrasas with codifying commercial law and diffusion of Arabic literacy. Yet fringe academic whispers insist that certain treaties concealed secret codes, maze-like rearrangements of words that guided cloak and dagger caravaneers on alternate routes if danger arose. Historians still question whether any hidden codes ever existed or if they sprang from later legends of covert trade. Beyond the madrasa, you trudge to the Camus market, where tents glint in midday glare. Salt stalls stand beside gold dust counters, while ivory tusks rest near crates of cola nuts and exotic cloths. The air tingles with spice, cinnamon, nutmeg, and mastic. You watch as a caravan merchant tentatively hands over a final salt brick in exchange for a leather pouch of glinting dust. The scales clank and the gold settles. Camels, now unburdened, kneel in relief to be unloaded. Handlers unwrap saddles, and animals gather clusters of millet stalks left by livestock traders. As dusk falls, you trudge to the city's northern gate. For departure, sandstone arches carved with calligraphy and geometric tile patterns, their surfaces cool beneath your palm. Caravan guides consult the latest Niger water levels and sky patterns, planning a riverine return to Gao or direct southward crossings toward Jenne. Mainstream navigation treatises of the era recommend river travel during high water months when rapids subside. Fringe boatmen's songs add that paddling by moonlit rime kept oars in harmony, preventing drift into hidden shoals. Scholars still debate whether paddle chants once guided oarsmen or belong to modern romantic reconstructions. You pause at the gate's threshold, where a city elder offers a cup of spiced tea, cloves, ginger, and powdered cinnamon swirling on hot water. Each sip tastes of journeys ended and bargains sealed. You trudge the final steps into the guarded square parchment permits, clutched in your sash, salt for gold profits, resting lightly on your conscience. Because in medieval Saharan trade arrival at Timbuktu was not merely journey's end, it was passage into civilization's crossroads, where white bricks born of Tagaza's searing sun became golden threads in a vast tapestry of commerce, culture, and shared humanity. beyond the desert's austere crucible. The night air in Timbuktu cools softly around you, carrying gentle whispers of the Niger's flowing song. You feel the weight of your journey ease as dark silhouettes of palm fronds sway beneath a star-laden sky. Each brick of salt, each grain of gold, and every blistered step has woven you into an ancient chain of traders who crossed dunes and storms for the promise of exchange. Now pause for a moment to let the city's lull cradle you. Let the rising moon and the call to prayer blend into a tranquil cadence, reminding you that every voyage ends in stillness. Rest your body, soothe your spirit, and trust that the journey's lessons of endurance, solidarity, and humble wonder will shimmer within you like desert stars. Allow your thoughts to drift beyond Timbuktu's bustling markets, back across wind-whispered dunes toward the stillness of home. In this quiet, breathe deeply. The caravan's heartbeat slows, the world softens, and you are safe in night's gentle embrace. Sweet dreams.